I invited a friend to stay with us for a month. I thought it would be a fun reunion of old friends. Instead, he and my girlfriend found something in common. One behind my back. And all my trust crumbled overnight. I met my girlfriend Haley at a party during my second year of college, one of those packed, chaotic nights where the music was too loud, the floors were sticky with spilled drinks, and you could barely hear yourself think, let alone have a real conversation. Somehow, through all that noise and madness, I found her, or maybe she found me, standing by the makeshift bar, laughing at something the guy next to her said, but with this spark in her eyes that made it impossible to look away. We started talking, yelling at first just to be heard, and within minutes it felt like the rest of the party had melted away, like it was just the two of us in a little bubble of connection. From that night on, we were inseparable. We slid into each other's lives so easily it was like we had always been meant to find each other, spending late nights studying together, exploring the city, sharing secrets and dreams over bad diner coffee. Now, 6 years later, we have built a life that feels solid and real, 2 years of living together in a cozy apartment that's never quite clean but always feels like home, a goofy golden retriever that we both spoil rotten, and 1,000 quiet plans for a future we talk about in the softest, most hopeful tones. It hasn't been perfect, but it has been ours, built with the kind of love that grows deeper with every ordinary day we choose each other all over again. My old friend Brian came back to the US after spending several years living abroad, bouncing between jobs in different countries and sending the occasional postcard or late-night message to let me know he was still alive and chasing the next adventure. When he told me he was finally coming home for a while, I didn't even hesitate before offering him a place to stay, knowing he didn't have a steady spot lined up yet and figuring it would be good for both of us to reconnect after so much time apart. I talked it over with Haley first, of course, and she agreed easily, always the generous one when it came to helping people out. So it was settled. Brian would stay with us for a month, crashing in the spare room we mostly used for laundry and storage, and in my mind, it felt like a perfect solution, a way to bridge the past and the present, to welcome back someone who had once been like a brother to me before life pulled us in different directions. I didn't think twice about it. At the time, it just felt right. Haley agreed without question when I told her about Brian staying with us, her face lighting up with that easy, generous smile that always made me feel like I had somehow won the lottery just by being loved by her. She didn't just say yes and leave it at that either. She went out of her way to make sure everything was perfect for him, spending an afternoon cleaning out the spare room, rearranging the furniture to make it feel less like a forgotten storage closet and more like a real, welcoming space. She even drove to the store after work one evening and picked out new bedding, carefully choosing a set she thought would make the room feel fresh and comfortable, like a small hotel tucked into the corner of our little home. Watching her fluff the pillows and fold an extra blanket at the foot of the bed, I remember standing in the doorway feeling this overwhelming rush of gratitude, thinking how unbelievably lucky I was to have someone who cared not just about me, but about the people I cared about too, someone who made every part of my life feel fuller, warmer, more complete just by being in it. Everything was great at first, better than I had even hoped, as the three of us slipped into an easy routine that felt almost like those carefree college days we used to talk about so fondly. We spent our evenings walking around the city, rediscovering old haunts and stumbling into new favorite spots, the kind of slow, wandering nights that made the world feel wide open and full of possibility. We had long, lazy dinners together at the kitchen table, plates piled high with takeout or homemade pasta, talking and laughing until the candles burned low and our dog curled up asleep at our feet. Brian was nothing but grateful and friendly, always thanking us for letting him stay, cracking jokes that made Haley laugh so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes, and slipping so seamlessly into our life that for a while, it felt like having him there was the most natural thing in the world. I would catch myself smiling at the way everything had worked out, thinking how lucky I was to have two people I cared about so much sharing the same space, making new memories together, weaving old friendship and new love into something bright and effortless. But after a few weeks, when the initial excitement and novelty started to settle into something more routine, I began to notice strange things that I couldn't quite explain away no matter how much I tried. It started small little moments I would catch out of the corner of my eye, like Brian and Haley laughing at inside jokes I didn't understand, jokes that would trail off into private smiles and glances that felt just a little too lingering. I would walk into the room and find them sitting a little too close together on the couch, their shoulders brushing, their conversations dropping into a softer, more intimate tone that immediately shifted the second I entered. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the comfort of old and new friendships blending together, that there was nothing wrong with two people being friendly when we had all grown so close. But the uneasiness settled in anyway, a quiet, persistent hum at the back of my mind that grew a little louder every time I saw them share a look I wasn't a part of, every time their laughter seemed just a beat too familiar. I tried to ignore it, pushing the discomfort deep down and telling myself over and over that I was just being paranoid, that after everything we had built together, after 6 solid years of love and trust, there was no way Haley would ever betray me, and there was no way Brian, someone who had been like a brother to me, would ever cross that line. I reminded myself that I had invited him into our home, that Haley had welcomed him with open arms out of kindness, not out of anything more complicated than that, and that I should be grateful they were getting along so well instead of seeing shadows where there were none. I convinced myself that it was a good thing, that it showed how strong and open our relationship really was, that we could bring someone else into our lives and still keep the easy closeness that made our home feel safe and full of light. Every time that small, sour voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts, I buried it under reassurances and smiles, determined not to let something as ugly as suspicion take root between us. I told myself love deserved better than that. I told myself trust deserved better than that. And so, for a while longer, I chose to believe it. One day, when I came home early from work after a meeting was unexpectedly canceled, I found them in the kitchen together, a scene so domestic and comfortable that for a moment I just stood there unnoticed, watching from the hallway. They were cooking dinner to music, the speakers playing something soft and easy, and the whole room smelled like garlic and spices, the windows slightly fogged from the warmth of the stove. Haley was standing barefoot, stirring a pot while Brian leaned against the counter beside her, laughing at something she said, their shoulders almost touching, moving around each other like it was second nature. They looked so relaxed, so effortlessly in sync, that a heavy knot formed in my chest before I even realized I was holding my breath. It wasn't anything overt, nothing I could point to later and say, that's when it all changed, but the way they moved, the way their smiles lingered just a second too long, the way their laughter filled the small kitchen, it was enough to bring back every doubt I had tried so hard to bury. I cleared my throat loudly, and they both turned toward me with startled, guilty faces that they tried to cover up with 2 bright smiles, and even as I walked into the room, pretending everything was fine, I knew that something deep down was not. Later that evening, after dinner was over and Brian had retreated to the guest room under the excuse of needing to take a long shower, I sat down with Haley and told her plainly that I needed to talk, my voice low and steady even though my heart felt like it was beating out of rhythm. I asked her directly if there was anything going on, if there was anything I needed to know, trying to keep my words from sounding like accusations because I wanted, more than anything, to believe that this was still the safe, honest relationship we had always promised each other. Haley didn't hesitate, she put down her wine glass, reached across the table, and told me with clear, steady eyes that there was absolutely nothing suspicious happening, that she cared about Brian as a friend, just like I did, and that I had nothing to worry about. Her words were simple, her touch reassuring, and even though a small wounded part of me still twisted with unease, I wanted so badly to trust her that I pushed my doubts aside again. I nodded, forced a smile, and naively believed her, telling myself that love meant trust and that trusting her was the right thing to do. I thought that by believing in her, I was protecting what we had built, not realizing then that sometimes trust is not just given, it has to be earned over and over again. Soon, the little things that I had once brushed off without thinking started to grate on me in a way I couldn't ignore, each small irritation stacking on top of the last until it felt like there was a permanent pressure sitting in my chest. Brian, who at first had been the perfect guest, began leaving dirty dishes in the sink without bothering to rinse them, scattering his clothes in the living room and borrowing my things without asking. My headphones, my jacket, even once my laptop, which somehow felt like a deeper kind of intrusion than I could explain. It wasn't just the mess or the thoughtlessness, it was the growing sense that he didn't see our home as something to be careful with anymore, that maybe he had started to feel a little too comfortable, a little too entitled to the space that Haley and I had built together. After a long night lying awake and staring at the ceiling, feeling that gnawing irritation bubbling into something dangerously close to resentment, I decided it was time to ask him to move out. I knew it wasn't just about the dishes or the laundry or the borrowed things, it was about everything that had shifted under the surface, everything I could no longer ignore without losing myself in the process. When I told Haley about my decision to ask Brian to move out, she was outraged in a way I hadn't expected, her face flushing with anger as she immediately jumped to his defense without even stopping to hear me out. She accused me of being selfish, of turning my back on a friend who needed help, and said that I was blowing everything out of proportion, making problems where there were none. Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, not just because of what she was saying, but because of how quickly she seemed to take his side over mine, how little room there was for understanding the hurt and discomfort I had been carrying alone for weeks. We had a fight, loud and bitter, the kind of argument that fills the house with heavy, silent echoes even after the shouting is over, and for the first time in a long time, I looked at Haley and felt like she wasn't really looking back at me. Despite all the anger and accusations, despite how much it hurt to feel her pull away from me in defense of someone else, Brian left anyway. He packed up his things quietly without much of a goodbye, and when the door finally closed behind him, the apartment didn't feel peaceful the way I had hoped. It felt heavier, lonelier, like something had cracked wide open between Haley and me that neither of us knew how to close again. I thought, foolishly, that with Brian gone, everything would eventually settle back into the rhythm we had known before, that the tension would fade and Haley and I could rebuild the pieces that had been chipped away during those strained weeks. For a little while, I clung to that hope, willing myself to believe that all the doubts and hurt could be patched over with time and effort. But then one evening as I sat down to check my email on our shared computer, a window popped open without warning, and there it was, an open message thread between Haley and Brian. At first, I didn't even realize what I was looking at, my brain struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing, but as I scrolled, confusion twisted into something darker, something that made my stomach lurch and my heart start pounding in my chest. The messages weren't innocent, weren't just old jokes or harmless updates. They were filled with lingering affection, secret conversations, and words that made it clear that what I had feared, what I had pushed down for so long wasn't just in my head. In that moment, staring at the screen that felt like it had ripped my life in two, I realized that nothing was ever going to go back to normal, because the trust one had fought so hard to hold on to had already been broken beyond repair. It turned out, as I scrolled further through the messages with shaking hands and a sick feeling settling into my gut, that they had met behind my back while I was away on a business trip to Chicago, a trip I had only been gone for 3 days but now realized had been enough time for everything to unravel. Brian called her sweetie and beautiful without a hint of hesitation, casual and intimate in a way that made my stomach churn, words that should have been reserved for something private between Haley and me but were now being thrown around in secret conversations I was never meant to see. He told her he missed her, that he wanted to hug her, weaving these little phrases into their chats like it was the most natural thing in the world, like they had built a connection that existed quietly outside of the life I thought we were all sharing. Reading it felt like standing under cold, brutal rain, realizing that while I had been working, trusting, loving from hundreds of miles away, they had been slowly crossing lines I didn't even know were being drawn. Every affectionate word, every hidden meeting, every lie of omission cracked wider the foundation of everything I thought was safe, and the weight of it nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even think clearly with the weight of those messages pressing down on my chest, so sometime in the dead of night, heart pounding and hands cold, I went into our bedroom and woke Haley up. She blinked at me in confusion, groggy and disoriented, but the moment she saw the look on my face, the tension in the room snapped into something sharp and undeniable. I told her I had seen the messages, laid it out plainly so there was no way to dodge or twist the truth, and demanded that she tell me everything. At first, she was furious, not at herself but at me, her voice rising as she accused me of violating her personal space, of crossing a line by looking through something that wasn't meant for me. She tried to turn the blame around, to make me the villain for uncovering what she had worked so hard to keep hidden, but I stood my ground, staring at her in silence until the fight drained from her face and the truth finally cracked through her defenses. With tears in her eyes and a voice so small I almost didn't catch the words, she admitted it. She admitted that they had grown emotionally close, that they had shared more than just laughter and glances, that while I was away trying to build a future for us, she had let something else grow in the spaces I couldn't fill from miles away. And then, when I asked the question I didn't want the answer to, she confessed they had kissed, once maybe twice, she said, like the number somehow made it less of a betrayal. Hearing her say it out loud broke something deep inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. After the confession spilled out between us like shattered glass, Haley didn't apologize the way I needed her to. Instead, she shifted the blame onto me, her voice trembling with anger and pain as she accused me of ignoring her emotionally. She said that for months she had felt like I wasn't really present, that I was too busy, too distracted with work and plans for the future to notice the way she was struggling, and that Brian had listened to her better than I ever had. Hearing her say those things, throwing my own failings back at me in the middle of a night already soaked in betrayal, only twisted the knife deeper into wounds that were still wide open. I knew I hadn't been perfect. I knew there were nights I stayed late at the office, days when I came home too tired to ask the right questions. But the idea that my shortcomings justified her reaching for someone else, that she had chosen secret meetings and hidden kisses instead of talking to me, made the hurt almost unbearable. Her excuses didn't soften the blow, they only made it sharper, more personal, as if not only had she betrayed me, but she needed me to believe that I deserved it somehow. Sitting there, listening to her pick apart the life we had built together, I felt like I was losing not just the woman I loved, but the very foundation of who we had been. I told her, as calmly as I could manage while my whole world was crumbling around me, that she needed to move out, that there was no way we could keep sharing a space that had once been our home but now felt heavy with everything that had been broken between us. She didn't fight me on it, not really. Maybe some part of her knew it was inevitable, that some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed no matter how much you wish they could. Within a few days she moved in with her sister across town, and I stayed behind in the house we had once filled with plans and laughter and so many small, quiet dreams. We split up our belongings without much ceremony, the way you might divide up the remains of a party after everyone else has gone home. I kept the house and the dog, the little life we had built together within these walls, because starting over somewhere else would have felt like losing everything twice. I gave her the car without argument, not because I wanted to be generous, but because I didn't want her to have to cling to anything that would keep her tethered to the past we had both destroyed. It felt strange, surreal almost, watching our life unravel into lists and piles, into keys exchanged and doors closed, but in the end, it was the cleanest kind of heartbreak we could manage after everything we had already shattered. Now I am in the long, slow process of rebuilding myself, trying to piece together the parts of my life that felt like they had been ripped apart without warning. In the beginning, it was unbearable, waking up to the silence, seeing the empty side of the bed, feeling the absence of someone I had once trusted with everything, but with time the sharpest edges of the pain began to dull and clarity started to take its place. I can see now, with a kind of painful honesty, that Haley had always carried within her a tendency to manipulate situations, to bend the truth when it suited her, to slip so easily into lies that I often mistook them for sincerity because I wanted so badly to believe in her. It's a hard truth to face, but it's also a liberating one, because it reminds me that losing her was not the tragedy I once thought it was. It was a narrow escape from a future that could have been filled with even deeper betrayal. I am grateful to fate, or whatever unseen force kept pushing me toward the truth, that everything fell apart when it did, before there was a wedding, before there were children caught in the middle of a foundation that was already cracked. I may have lost the future I thought I was building, but I also saved myself from building it on lies, and that, in its own bittersweet way, feels like the beginning of something better.